Now let's wrap up our look into factoring here. We just did difference of squares. We're going to wrap up with what I'm going to call product. I'm going to call it product sum grouping. Okay, product sum grouping. And you may say, "Gosh, well that sounds a little bit like factoring by grouping and product sum factoring." Well, you're right. It is. It's a little bit of both of those things. So we are going to do a product sum thing, and then also we're going to factor by grouping. It's a little bit of each. So you may want to watch this video a couple times because it can be a little tricky, but once you get good at this technique, you're going to be very good at factoring. Okay? So let's see, we got product sum grouping. Let's say that we have the expression 3x squared plus x minus 10. Now, to do product sum grouping, here's what you're going to do. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to multiply. Notice the difference here. Notice in this one, there's a number other than 1 at the front here, okay? Which means that you can't use product sum factoring on this, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We are going to multiply the first number and the last number. What is 3 times negative 10? That's negative 30, right? And here's what we want to do. Now we're going to do something like product sum factoring. Instead of looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 10, we're going to look for two numbers that multiply to negative 30. So the first thing you have to do is multiply the first and the last number, then find two numbers that multiply to that number. So what multiplies to negative 30? Okay. Now also, what you're looking for here is whatever two numbers you find, they have to add up to the middle number, just like before in product sum factoring. So what two numbers multiply to negative 30? Well, we know that 3 and negative 10 multiply to negative 30 because we just did that, right? But if you add those together, you would get, we want them to add up to 1, right? Multiply to negative 30 and add up to 1 because there's a 1 here in front of the x. But these two, they add up to negative 7, so that can't be correct. And if we did negative 3 and positive 10, this would add up to positive 7, so that can't be correct. What other numbers multiply to negative 30? See, 30, 15 and 2, right? Okay, let's say 2 and negative 15. But 2 and negative 15, they add up to negative 13, and that's not helpful. Okay? Well, it's helpful in that now we know what the wrong answer is, right? Let's find the right answer. Can you think of two other numbers that multiply to negative 30? Or just 30, and then make one negative and one positive? What multiplies to 30? 5 and 6. All right, maybe 5 and 6, but we got to make one of them negative. What if we did negative 6 and positive 5? Well, if we add those together, we get negative 1. Okay, we're close. We don't want negative 1, we want positive 1, which must mean we got the right numbers, wrong signs, right? So we'll make this one a positive 6 and this one a negative 5. We add 6 and negative 5, we get positive 1. Those are our numbers. Now, what you're not going to do is you're not going to set up your parentheses yet. What you're now going to do is this. You're going to bring down the first number, 3x squared, or the first term, and the last term, negative 10. And then what you're going to do is in the middle, you're going to use these two numbers, the positive 6 and the negative 5, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to put, positive 6, and you're going to put an x on each one, plus 6x minus 5x, right? And see, what we just did was we broke this apart. We broke the middle term apart into two pieces. Would you agree that 6x minus 5x is equal to x? So this is the same expression as this, but it's been sort of broken larger. It's broken into bigger, more pieces. Okay? All right, now, what does this look like? Doesn't this look like factoring by grouping, which you just learned how to do in another video? So what we're going to do is we're going to put parentheses around the first two. And then what do we do on the second one if it's got a negative here? Do you remember what I said to do? I said before in the video to leave it with the number that's there, put parentheses around the 2, and put a plus in between, right? The next step in factoring by grouping is to take out the greatest common factor. Well, there's an x here and an x here. So, and what's the smallest number of x's? 1, right? so we're going to take an x out. Is there a number that goes into 3 and 6? Yes, 3, right? So we'll take a 3 out, and now we'll open a parenthesis. What is 3x squared divided by 3x? Well, 3 divided by 3 is 1, so that cancels. X squared divided by x is x to the first power, or just x. Now, what is here? We have 6. What is 6 divided by 3? Well, that's positive 2. So we'll put a plus 2, and the x divided by x, that cancels, and so we don't have an x. And so this is now our first group. We've taken out the greatest common factor. Let's go to our second group. Now, there's an x here, but there's no x here, so we are not going to take out an x at all. But what goes into 5 and 10? 5, right? 5 divides into 5, and 5 divides into 10. So we're going to take a 5 out. But don't forget, if the leading coefficient in that term, or excuse me, in that expression is negative, we want to take the negative out with it. So we're not going to take a 5 out, we're going to take a negative 5 out. So I'm going to put a minus 5, right? Now divide each one of these by negative 5. Well, what's negative 5 divided by negative 5? 1, right? Okay, so let's open our parenthesis. So 1, and then there's an x left, right? Because we're not dividing out an x. So it's 1x or just x, right? Now, what is negative 10 divided by negative 5? Positive 2. So we'll put a plus 2 here. And it's a good thing we got positive 2 to put a plus 2 here, because remember, in factoring by grouping, this factor and this factor have to be identical. So now we can write our factors, okay? One of the factors is going to be this identical thing here, x plus 2. The other factor, if you recall, is made up by our greatest common factors. We've got a 3x and a minus 5, so that means our other factor is 3x minus 5, okay? This is product sum grouping, okay? Let's do at least one more example, maybe 2 more if we can. Let's try this one. How about 5x squared plus 19x minus 4? Why don't you pause the video and see if you can give it a shot? Just see how far you can get. Maybe you'll get all the way to the end. Or maybe rewind the video and watch me do the first example while you're doing this example. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to figure this out. The first thing we have to do is multiply the 5 times the negative 4 here, and that's negative 20. Well, what are 2 numbers that multiply to negative 20? Now remember, they have to add up to positive 19, right? So I'm thinking here, well, I know it's not going to be negative 4 and 5 because that adds up to 1. And I know it's not the other way around. That'll add up to negative 1. So I'm thinking maybe I think it's probably 20, because 20 is close to 19, right? And negative 1, right? Because 20 times negative 1 equals negative 20, and 20 plus negative 1 is equal to 19, correct? And that's what we need, 19 here. So our 2 numbers are positive 20 and negative 1, right? So we're going to come over here. We're going to bring down the 5x squared. And we're going to bring down the negative 4. And in the middle, we're going to break the 19 up into positive 20 and negative 1x. It's got to be positive 20x and negative 1x. Because remember, there's an x on that 19, right? So now, I don't have to put the 20 first. I could put the minus 1 first. So what if I put minus 1x first? But we don't put a 1 in front of the x, right? If it's 1x, it's just x. So we're going to take out the 1, okay? And then I'll put on plus 20x. And now, what do we do next? Group, right? We're going to group them and then take out the greatest common factor. So now we're going to put parentheses around the first 2 parentheses around the second 2, and because there's a plus in the middle, we're just going to leave it as a plus. Is there a variable in this term and this term? There sure is. There's an x here and an x here. What's the smallest number of x's? 1. So we're going to take an x out. Okay. Now what about, is there a number? There's a 1 here and a 5 here. There's no number that we can divide out of both of those numbers. So we'll just leave this as x. Well, what's 5x squared divided by x? Well, this is x to the first power, this is x to the second power, so 2 minus 1 is 1. So we're going to bring down the 5, and it's x to the first power. And then what's negative x divided by x? Well, that's negative 1, right? Okay, see? Negative x divided by x. X divided by x, that's 1, right? And a negative. It's just, I've noticed that a lot of people struggle with this expression right here, and it basically just means, anytime you have something divided by itself, it equals 1. Only in this case, it was a negative divided by a positive. So we got a minus 1. Now here, what can we factor out of 20 or what can we divide into 20 and into 4? Now note there's no x here, so we can't take any x's out, right? But what goes into 20 and also goes into 4 evenly, for a whole number? 4, right? 4 goes into 4 and 4 goes into 20. Well, so we're going to take a 4 out, a positive 4. The reason we're taking a positive out is because the front here is positive, so we're not going to take a negative out. What's 20 divided by 4? It's 5, right? And then we'll have the x. And what's negative 4 divided by 4? Negative 1, just like negative x divided by x was negative 1. And look, it's a good thing. We got 5x minus 1 in both of these situations, right? So we know that one of our factors is 5x minus 1, and that the other factor is going to be our common factors that we took out, x and a plus 4. So the other factor is going to be x plus 4, okay? And we have factored this original thing here.